Courtney, that was bloody fantastic.
Thank you.
Let me tell you something, Courtney. Something has changed in you. Trust me. In the time you were on the show last year to now, your interaction with the audience, the confidence. I think this has been my favourite performance of you so far.
There are moments in television history that freeze time. Moments where the audience holds its breath, where the judges forget their roles, and where something genuinely unexpected unfolds in front of millions of watching eyes. Simon Cowell has sat in that judge's chair for decades. He has heard thousands of voices, witnessed thousands of performances, and built a reputation as the man who simply cannot be moved. Cold, calculated, commercially precise. That is the Simon Cowell the world knows. That is the Simon Cowell who built an empire on the back of his own unshakable composure. But something cracked that image, and it had everything to do with a girl from a tiny mining village in County Durham, England, who walked onto the America's Got Talent stage in 2018 looking like she had accidentally wandered into the wrong building. She was 13 years old, barely 5 feet tall, and visibly terrified. And then she opened her mouth. What happened next would not only change her life forever, it would eventually chip away at something inside Simon Cowell himself, something he had spent years making sure the world never saw. This is the story of Courtney Hadwin. And this is the story of what her journey ultimately cost both of them. To understand the full weight of what eventually moved Simon Cowell, you first have to understand where Courtney came from, because her origin is not a glamorous one. Esselden is not a place you find on tourist maps. It is a small, quiet former mining village nestled near Hartlepool in the northeast of England, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where ambition is respected but also quietly tempered by the reality of limited resources and long distances from opportunity. Courtney was born on July 6, 2004, and she grew up in that village, surrounded by family who loved her deeply. Her parents, Paul and Anne-Marie, were not wealthy people. They were hardworking, devoted, and fiercely supportive of their daughter's emerging passion for music. Her father, in particular, took on extra work, including delivering pizzas on evenings and weekends, just to cover the petrol money needed to drive Courtney across the Northeast to auditions, open mic nights, and singing lessons. That is the kind of support that does not make headlines, but is the kind of support that builds a singer's soul. Courtney first began singing seriously around the age of 9 or 10, inspired partly by watching Connie Talbot perform on Britain's Got Talent years earlier. There was something about seeing a young girl stand on a massive stage and hold the entire room in her voice that ignited something inside young Courtney. She began vocal training at local academies, participated in school performances, and by 11 years old, she was already making people stop and listen. A lunchtime open mic performance at her school, where she sang a cover of Say Something by A Great Big World and Christina Aguilera, was filmed and shared on social media, and the clip spread quickly through her local community. People were stunned. This was not the voice of a child. This was something far older and far more powerful wearing the face of schoolgirl. She entered regional competitions, trained relentlessly, buskied locally to help fund more lessons, and by the time she was 12, she had won Hartlepool's Performer of the Year award. At the South Tyneside Festival, she performed in front of over 18,000 people as an opening act, and she held that crowd with the kind of confidence that most seasoned performers spend careers trying to develop. She competed on The Voice Kids UK, earned a spot on a team, advanced through multiple rounds, and emerged with a reputation that extended well beyond County Durham. By early 2018, Courtney Hadwin was a known name in regional British music circles. But the world beyond those circles had no idea what was coming. When Courtney walked onto the America's Got Talent stage in the summer of 2018, the contrast between her appearance and her ability was almost theatrical in its impact. She stood there in the glare of those enormous studio lights, hunched slightly, eyes wide, looking genuinely overwhelmed by the scale of it all. The judges exchanged the kind of glances that suggested they were preparing themselves for a well-meaning, but ultimately average audition. Simon leaned back in his chair with the patient, slightly bored expression of a man who had already seen everything worth seeing. And then the music started. The opening notes of Otis Redding's Hard to Handle rolled through the studio, and something unbelievable happened. The girl who had been standing there like she wanted to disappear simply vanished, and in her place stood someone entirely different. Her body transformed. Her energy exploded outward. And that voice, that extraordinary, impossible, ancient-sounding voice, filled every inch of that enormous room and refused to let go of a single person inside it. The audience was on its feet almost immediately. Judge Howie Mandel reached for the golden buzzer before the song had even finished, sending golden confetti cascading down over a 13-year-old girl who was crying and laughing at the same time. But it was Simon's reaction that told the real story. The man who prides himself on never being surprised looked genuinely stunned. He leaned back as if physically pushed by what he was hearing. His hands pressed together. His eyes stayed fixed on her with an expression that was entirely unguarded, entirely authentic. He told her afterward, "You were this shy little thing when you came out, and then you sing, and you're like a lion." It was not a rehearsed compliment. It was the honest observation of a man who had just witnessed something that defied easy explanation. Within hours, her audition video was spreading across the internet at a pace that left everyone breathless. Within days, it had been viewed by tens of millions of people. Critics were calling her a generational talent. Comparisons to Janis Joplin flooded comment sections and entertainment columns. A 13-year-old girl from a former mining village in England had just become one of the most talked about musical discoveries on the planet. And Simon Cowell had a decision to make. Simon moved quickly, as Simon always does. By December 2018, Courtney had signed a recording and publishing deal with Psycho Music, his label, in partnership with Arista Records. She was 14 years old. The announcement was celebrated. Courtney herself described it as a dream come true, saying she was thrilled to be making original music and staying true to who she was as an artist. The excitement was real and entirely understandable. She had worked for years, sacrificed comforts that other teenagers took for granted, and pushed herself through every audition and competition that came her way. This was the reward she had been working toward. But the music industry is not a reward. It is a machine. And machines do not adjust their pace for the emotional readiness of the people they process. Almost immediately, Courtney found herself inside a world she was not equipped to navigate alone. The schedule was relentless. Recording sessions were booked across continents. Meetings with label executives, promotional appearances, media interviews, and songwriting sessions with teams of professional producers filled her calendar with a density that would challenge a fully grown adult with years of industry experience. For a 14-year-old who had grown up busking in the northeast of England to fund her own singing lessons, it was something close to overwhelming. The creative side proved equally difficult. Courtney had always been an artist who connected with music on a deeply personal level. Her power as a performer came from authenticity, from genuine emotion, from the raw, unfiltered way she inhabited every song. But inside a major label environment, that authenticity was something to be refined, shaped, and redirected toward commercial viability. Producers pitched sounds and styles that did not match what she felt inside. Songwriting sessions pulled her toward themes and structures that felt foreign to her instincts. She later described the experience with remarkable clarity, saying that everyone around her seemed to have a clear picture of who she should be, and none of those pictures matched the one she saw when she looked in the mirror. She was still a teenager. She was still figuring out who she was as a person, let alone as an artist. And yet the machine kept moving, kept demanding, kept expecting her to deliver. What happened next did not happen all at once. It was gradual, quiet, and all the more painful for its slowness. Courtney began to withdraw. Her social media posts became less frequent. Her public appearances dwindled. The interviews grew sparse. Fans who had followed her journey with genuine devotion began to notice the silence and began to worry. There was no dramatic announcement, no public breakdown, no tabloid scandal to explain her fading presence. She simply receded from the spotlight with the quiet dignity of someone who had realized, at a very young age, that the spotlight was not currently a healthy place for her to stand. The mental and emotional toll of her early years in the industry had been significant. She has spoken since with honesty and courage about the burnout she experienced, about the loss of control over her own creative identity, about the isolation of traveling between countries while still being, at her core, a young girl who missed home. She described feelings of being disconnected from the music she was making, of performing songs that carried her voice but not her soul, of sitting in sessions where her input felt unwelcome or irrelevant. For someone whose entire power as an artist derived from authenticity, being disconnected from authenticity was not just artistically frustrating. It was genuinely damaging. Simon Cowell, meanwhile, continued his work. New seasons of talent competitions aired. New artists were signed and developed. The machinery of the entertainment industry, which does not pause for reflection, moved on. Courtney's name appeared less frequently in his public conversations. The partnership that had seemed so promising faded into the background noise of the industry, and eventually into something close to silence. Is worth noting that none of this necessarily reflects malice on Simon's part. He operates within a system that has very specific structures and very specific expectations, and those structures were not built with the particular emotional and developmental needs of a 14-year-old from County Durham in mind. But the absence of malice does not equal the absence of harm. And as the years passed and the full picture of Courtney's early experience began to emerge, it became harder and harder to avoid a difficult question. Did the system that Simon placed her into fail her? And did he, as the most powerful person in that system where she was concerned, bear some responsibility for what happened? While the public largely moved on, Courtney was doing something remarkable in the quiet spaces the industry had not reached. She was rebuilding herself, not the version of herself that had been constructed by label meetings and promotional briefs, but the actual, original, honest version that had first started singing properly at 9 years old in a small village in England because music made her feel alive. She began working with Grammy-winning producer Kevin Bowe, whose career had been built on collaborations with deeply authentic artists. Their working relationship allowed her the creative freedom she had been denied during her label years, a space where the starting point was always her experience, her emotion, and her artistic instinct rather than commercial expectation. The music that emerged from those sessions was different from anything that had been produced under the Psycho umbrella. It was rawer, more honest, more personal, and more unmistakably hers. Songs began to take shape that spoke directly to her experience. Monsters addressed the internal battles she had fought during her most difficult years. You Only Love Me When I Lie examined the performance that fame demands, the requirement to smile and shine even when the reality underneath is fractured and hurting. Breakable explored vulnerability not as weakness, but as the essential material from which real art is constructed. Each track carried the emotional fingerprints of genuine lived experience, and listeners responded to them with the kind of engagement that cannot be manufactured or marketed into existence. Own terms at her own pace, rooted in her own experience and her own truth, Courtney described this period as a rebirth. She spoke in interviews about the difference between making music because a schedule demanded it and making music because a feeling inside her demanded it. She talked about waking up excited to write rather than anxious about deadlines. She talked about the difference between recording songs she believed in and recording songs she had been steered toward. The shift was profound, and it showed in every note she released. By 2025, Courtney Hadwin had completed a journey that relatively few people who enter the entertainment industry at such a young age manage to complete intact. She had gone in as a phenomenon, emerged battered and uncertain, retreated to find herself, and returned as something more durable and more genuinely impressive than the viral sensation she had originally been celebrated as. Her debut album, Little Miss Jagged, was announced for a September 2025 release date and was met with anticipation from a fan base that had waited patiently and loyally through the years of relative silence. Early singles drew strong responses from critics who noted that her voice had not simply maintained its power through the years of difficulty, but had deepened and gained new dimensions. One review described her as sounding like thunder and fire in the same breath, which is the kind of language that gets attached to artists who have actually lived something rather than simply performed it. She performed at Carnegie Hall in April 2024, invited by the legendary industry figure Clive Davis to open a gala event with a Janis Joplin tribute. Standing in that room, in front of some of the most experienced and respected people in the music industry, she delivered a performance that left no room for doubt about who she was or what she was capable of. The girl who had walked nervously onto the AGT stage a decade earlier was gone. In her place stood a young woman who had earned every note she sang. Back home in County Durham, she continued to live simply and authentically. She drew creative energy from her local roots, from the landscape and the people and the straightforward honesty of the Northeast community that had shaped her. She engaged with her online audience not with the polished distance of a celebrity, but with the warmth and directness of someone who genuinely valued the connection. And through all of it, the question of Simon Cowell lingered in the background. Simon Cowell is not a man who is easily made to feel accountable. His public persona has been built carefully and deliberately on the image of the uncompromising professional, the man who calls things as he sees them, takes credit for his successes, and moves forward without excessive sentiment about the past. That persona has served him extraordinarily well across a career that spans decades and continents. But personas are not armor. They are performance. And even the most disciplined performance eventually encounters a moment that it cannot quite contain. Reports and clips that circulated in recent years suggested that Simon had begun to reflect, perhaps for the first time with genuine candor, on what had happened to Courtney.